Welcome to the Supercharge Marketing Podcast. I'm Pius, the head of growth at Lumen 5, an AI video creator made by marketers for marketers. This podcast is a rally call for those who believe in purposeful content, brand storytelling, and thought leadership. We feature insights and best practices from forward-thinking marketers and B2B leaders, daring you to stand out in the rapidly evolving world around us. Are you ready to supercharge your marketing? Hi, everyone. I'm very excited for today's episode of Supercharge Marketing. Today, I'm joined by Nate Turner, CEO and co-founder of 10Speed, a content optimization agency that helps SaaS companies create and capture demand by really getting the most out of every piece of content. Now, Nate has spent a handful of years as a growth advisor in different growth advisor roles, helping companies optimize their content strategies. Had almost spent 9 years at Sprout Social in a variety of VP leadership functions, including marketing operations, acquisition, demand gen, online marketing. I have to point out that Nate was the very first marketer at Sprout, helping them grow from a respectable $100K in annual revenue to over $22 million in just 5 short years. That's amazing to have been on that journey, and the lessons and experiences you must have learned and must have kind of taken with you today. Nate and I were talking yesterday, and I was telling him that in my time at Hootsuite, we'd come up across Sprout Social many times. So I'm very, very excited to meet the band behind the marketing today. Nate, thanks for joining me. I'm very excited for this part 2 of our conversation. And maybe let's kick off with a little bit about yourself, a little intro, and kind of tell us about your journey in marketing and what led you and what drives you here today.
Yeah, I appreciate the intro. I'm excited to be here today and chatting with you. Yeah, I think you covered a lot, certainly. And yeah, the first 5 years at Sprout were a lot of fun, growing. We did grow very quickly, I think relative to many others our size to that 22 million mark, but then was also able to stay through several more years and grow to 100 million in IPO, which was just a fantastic experience and a lot of learnings. So that that was really a bulk of my experience. Content marketing and SEO were a big growth lever for us, and so learned a lot about not just how do you create blogs, but like how do you have the foundation, the technical, the systems, the team, all the way through to measurement and knowing where to invest and becoming part of a bigger brand and more types of content and all kinds of learnings from that. So very cool. And then advisory, got to work with a lot of different SaaS companies and get some different viewpoints outside of Sprout and see how things worked and how they varied, which has been cool. And then late 2020, we started 10Speed and launched at the end of 2020 and have been working primarily with software companies and just getting to, again, get a ton of exposure to early, seed Series A stage companies all the way up to, Series D and much larger companies and working with some in-house teams as well. So it's been a really cool experience getting to just like capture a lot of different viewpoints and get a lot of hands-on experience as well in those areas of sort of the content marketing and SEO.
Yeah, that's very cool. I think, one thing that we can all say in marketing is it's really like an iceberg, right? The tip of what you see is what you put out there, but there's so much that goes on underneath the surface. Yeah. And really building a team from yourself to that big, and also now working across a bunch of different companies, you must see a lot of things that happen behind the scenes. Is there anything that kind of stands out to you that's similar across all these companies that you work with in the functions that you help them with around content?
One thing that I often share that seems to be a common denominator among companies that really grow their content programs and succeed is actually has nothing to do with the content. It's that the like CEO or executive leadership is bought in and supports it and advocates and funds it and everything. Because there's, now that we talk to many companies a week between clients and prospects, and there's people that have great opportunities, like the topics, the space they're in, their product is awesome, but there's just not buy-in or alignment or whatever it might be. So I would say that's actually a non-marketing thing that's a common thread for sure, is that. And I would say the other is just people who just have a really, really good understanding of who their target audience is and how they can be helpful and add value. So certainly it's more than just trying to get clicks and leads in a very quantitative standpoint. It's really trying to build into what your ideal customer and your your target audience needs, and you want to be helpful to them, which then ultimately builds trust and builds brand affinity and all that stuff that then down the line can certainly lead to the business results.
Yeah, that's a really good point you bring up, especially around the buy-in piece, because when you look at marketing now, it's well, as always, but as a revenue generator part of a company, it really touches all aspects of the company, not just within the front part, like we're talking with that iceberg. What people see is that brand, but all the things that go on in the background are very much influenced by marketers and marketing because of the tie-in with the customer and whatnot. When you're working with these leaders who are bought in, what's that magic, I guess, secret within marketers to get their leaders bought in if they're not? Or is that something that leaders are typically come into the situation already bought in, or can marketers make a difference in how much their leaders are?
Yeah, I think it's the latter. Yeah, I've spoken about this in the past. Like, I've had a lot of people come to me and be like, how do I sell the, my CEO that we should um, invest in SEO, or how should I pitch this or whatever. And and it's not that everyone's closed minded and that you can't successfully pitch something, but you're certainly fighting an uphill battle at that point. There's
Yeah.
I was really kind of sussing that out in the interview process before I even joined Sprout, of like, hey, maybe not, but I had a background, at least a couple of years at that point in SEO, and said, hey, I really feel like SEO long term could be a really big channel for this. And there was probably talking about like 2010 at this point. So maybe a bit less in terms of like a content led SEO approach at that time, but still just understanding that like it was going to need more than just the single page homepage that was there at the time of me interviewing. And the Justin, the CEO, was like, totally agree. I'm aligned. Like this, I think it'll be big for us. And so like, already you're just aligned and you kind of got buy-in, and it doesn't mean blank checks and there's no guardrails on what you're trying to do. It just means that you don't have to try to convince at the core foundation of what you're trying to do. So I think that's ultimately the biggest thing really, is that folks are coming in kind of already ready, kind of see the long-term value in it.
Yeah, that's very cool. It's very nice to have support from the leaders, and also to kind of get that push and support when you need it, when you want to push them as the front facing thought leader of the company as well.
Yeah.
Now,
Sorry.
the
One other thing I would add is just I've had, I think twice now, I've had conversations with CEOs over the years who one was like, I would write $1 million check today if there was a clear path and like strategy and solution to content. Like there was like, I'm ready to put money behind this. And another one was basically like, I keep saying that I have to keep pushing the team because they're not thinking big enough. So there's just kind of a couple more examples, I guess, of the CEO or leadership and kind of where their mindset's at, that, for them to be thinking like, hey, my team's not even thinking big enough about this opportunity, I want to be doing
yeah.
more, is very different than having to keep, pitching your CEO on why you should be doing it.
Yeah, that's amazing. That really is the leader, kind of empowering your team to think bigger, and when everyone can kind of play to their strength, especially in marketing when it's so creative and the directions you
Yes.
can go is vast. It's an open space, and really you need to pick the right market to go after, and pick the right messaging to go after the market. But yeah, I found it challenging in the past when you do work with leaders who are limiting and kind of limit you to a space, and that limits creativity, which then also kind of limits the thinking of your team. So it's really nice to have that push from your colleagues, but also your leaders as well. Yeah. Now, the hot topic in content marketing today is really around repurposing content. I mean, with budgets being cut and resources limited in this coming year, it's really a tough time to get stuff done as a marketer. And we're consistently seeing and hearing this message that marketers and all around need to get more done with less. And repurposing content is a very tactful and kind of strategic way to do that, and amplify and multiply your existing work. And something that you speak on is this notion of content decay, which is really interesting. Can you talk about that a little bit more, and what that means, and how we can work against it?
Yeah. So content decay, there, I think at a high level, everyone understands that content can get outdated, whether that's your product screenshots that you've embedded, or the product's changed over time, or your positioning's changed a little bit, or the features you offer, whatever it might be. Like, I think everyone kind of understands that can happen over time. And I think that generally there's been a lot of discussion around like updating existing blog content over the years, but not really a lot of guidance. Some people will literally just go update the publish date or make a few changes, but it's sort of a blind, it's sort of a blind approach to it. And so content decay is, I didn't make up the term, but I think the phrase decay, or the term decay, I think is intentional because, most people would notice in their analytics if, one day they're getting 400 or 500 visits a day from a post, and the next day it's, 10 or 20. And you'd be like, whoa, something dropped off. Let's figure out what's going on. And not that can't happen, but typically content decay is decaying over time, and it goes 400 to 380 to 390 to 350, and just sort of like this slow fall off. And the reasons behind that are many, but really what you're talking about is organic performance is declining. So you're losing impressions in organic, you're losing rankings in organic, you're losing traffic, and then potentially subsequent newsletter subscribers, leads, revenue, all the downstream stuff once you get that traffic from organic. And so the reasons behind it are numerous. There's search intent changes. You may be creating a bunch of content internally that's sort of overlapping and creating some internal competition that hurts it. Your external competitors may be just beating you out in that, and really like creating a lot more relevant stuff. And there's just like a list kind of goes on. And so decay is really a thing that, when left unchecked for teams, really just starts to work against them. They build this program, they put a lot of effort into what's our strategy, how do we create content, do all this stuff, and then not really paying attention to, for every 10 new clicks or whatever that they're generating from the current strategy, they're also losing 2 or 3 under the surface from not paying attention to what's going on with existing content and addressing it. So as you can imagine, earlier on, it may not be as big of a deal, but when you start to have maybe a few hundred posts or well into the thousands, then that can start to be a pretty detrimental thing to your overall compounding growth.
Yeah. Is there a strategy that you have to kind of maintain the content to keep it more so relevant, I guess, with what we're talking about today, or maybe some type of different updates or process that you employ?
Yeah. So I think the operationalizing it is very important, because it's, it's like anything. I think it maybe would fall a bit more into like a chore for some people, versus the exciting what's new that we can create. Although once you understand the impact of, properly addressing it and refreshing the content and getting the traffic back, and sometimes even more than what you had before, it becomes a bit more fun. But so I would say there's 3 key things to operationalizing it. One is to set a regular cadence for when you're going to analyze all of your existing content performance. So at probably the minimum, you would want to do it quarterly. If you have quite a bit of traffic and quite a bit of content, then potentially monthly. And really, there's a couple ways you can go about it. There's some tools out there that will kind of, maybe check a little bit and point you in the direction. But, you also could just go into Search Console or Google Analytics and look at the last 3 months versus the 3 months prior, and to see like, where have we lost impressions, where have we lost clicks. You can look in your SEO tool and understand, any sort of losses in the number of keywords you rank for, and just sort of start there as like an understanding of where are we actively losing. And then, from there, it does require a bit kind of one by one, go through and analyze the SERPs and the content and kind of determine why it's happening. But having that regular cadence to check it is one. 2 is to make sure that whatever your regular cadence is for planning content. So if that's a month, like every month you're setting the content calendar for next month, or quarterly, whatever it might be, your regular cadence allows room for updating content. So similarly, if you plan every month or every quarter and you jam pack that full of new content, then you say like, oh, we'll get to the update, you won't. Or you have to get to it because it's so dire. You're losing so much traffic there that it throws off your other plans. So I think having planning that creates space each month to have some updates is important. And then lastly is just the actual, writing and execution of it, and really not trying to treat everything the same. Like I said before, some people just go update, publish date, and call it good. Like, you really have to have the space to take the time, analyze each one individually, and then create the content that you need to. So sometimes that's adding to the post. Sometimes it's splitting off and creating a totally new dedicated one in an area that you're not covering well enough. Sometimes it's consolidating multiple, setting up 301 redirects. So I would say that covers a lot of it. So it's a regular cadence for checking, analyzing your data, having room within your planning each month or each quarter to update when you need to, and then creating whatever you need to, or updating whatever you need to in an individual basis, instead of putting everything through the same process.
Yeah, I love that. Actually, that first one where you're really using that data to make the decisions, and looking at content and seeing where it drops off in performance, that's huge.
Yep.
And I don't know if enough marketers are really doing this, where they're going back to analyze the actual drop off of the performance, and realizing that it's, going back to analyze that content first to realize what the issue is, updating it properly. And you kind of touched that on your third point with the execution. And we spoke a little bit about this yesterday, where it's sort of like that purposeful repurposing, where you take a piece of content and you realize there's something issue with it, not just updating the date, but updating maybe the something happened, something relevant that changed what that article was all about. And now you're able to repurpose that into a new content, or at least update it to be relevant. But yeah, that data piece is huge as well. And I like the second point, really just putting cadence and planning around making this a regular part of the duties and the processes within the team. And this goes back to really making sure that all of your content is up to par, and it's building your brand. And something we talked about yesterday was brand diminishing versus brand building. I think this really falls into that, where you're realizing that maybe your past content that was doing really well is now actually diminishing your brand because of some outdated pieces. So
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think there's a lot to it. And yeah, the more you get into it, the more you can really uncover some of the opportunity there. So yeah, it's big. And there's, I think, like I said, I think people have had a general awareness around, like, oh, you should update old content, but not fully understanding the steps to take to figure out the extent of what's going on. Because we've had some clients come to us, and like, we literally spent the first few months just updating existing content, which is great because it really turned things around quickly. And then it went from that to, let's do half existing updates and half new, and then sort of like shift that over time. But yeah, there could be some cases when it's pretty bad.
yeah, and I guess when doing that, you also find out which one of your content is really true evergreen content that has that staying power, that's relevant, and that's like that thought leadership that you can build around. And then which of your content is more ephemeral and doesn't last as long, and it's more built for social than maybe like on your company website. And so yeah, it's a really good way of kind of analyzing which ones to use. What are some of the, I guess, in your experience, what are some of the insights, maybe tactics that the marketers can use or need to pay attention to when repurposing content and reposting it elsewhere?
I think, a few of the things, one is like, there's a number of tools that have come out more recently that, like, I think can help do that. And do that. And I think, Lumen 5 obviously has a lot of that functionality. I think that, like, you still have to have the human craft and discernment to go along with that. Like, you can't just say, oh, I got this tool, I just drop it in, it churns out a bunch of stuff, I post it all, or it posts automatically. Some of the things with, spinning up one video or one podcast into 50 TikToks automatically or something, like, you're probably going to have some stuff that shouldn't really be out there. Like, you wouldn't ever go create that clip independently. And so I think that's one I would say is, like, the tools are awesome. They're very, like, effective, very powerful in saving time, but still require some of the discernment around what should you actually be using, and what is the best pieces of that to actually be publishing and repurposing. Another tip would be just, I certainly didn't come up with this, but I think it's still continues to be a powerful one, which is just to plan it ahead of time instead of create the thing and then try and figure out how you can, chop it up or redistribute, and really think ahead into, we're going to create this thing and we know it's going to turn into 3 video clips and 2 text posts and a blog recap and a newsletter and all that. I think that becomes more powerful. And lastly, which maybe should have been the first point, is just the most important thing is you're really understanding what's valuable to your audience, and making sure that the process, again, is not just, it's not a matter of like just putting a bunch of clips out there because you can, but really understanding what's valuable to them and what's going to say, hey, you didn't have to watch this 45-minute webinar because we pulled the best 4 minutes out into these 2-minute clips, and like, we're going to just put it right in front of you because that's more valuable to you. So I would say that's the third one, just be really understanding what your audience wants and needs and where they find value in aligning to that.
Yeah. No, for sure. And you actually bring up a very interesting point, in marketers need to understand the audience and what's valuable to them, and to be able to provide them with the content that they need and want to see. And there's just so much content out there today that people don't have the time to, watch 10 seconds of the video to figure out what it's about. It has to be really quick and timely and relevant to them too. So we're starting to really see this shift where marketers need to create their content more so around a one-to-one basis, creating that personalized, impactful content to their customers at the right time, per se, right? You mentioned TikTok, and if you're on LinkedIn versus you're on TikTok, you're the same person, but your mindset is different when you're scrolling through different platforms and you're expecting different type of content. So how can marketers create content around that mindset, and how do they find out about, you, Nate, being the same one person? How do I appeal to you when you're on LinkedIn versus TikTok with that same kind of message and content?
I think the easiest thing and probably the most logical thing is just to actually spend time on the platforms and engage. Like a great example is like it, and I'm actually not like a big Reddit user personally, but I know enough to know that like, if you come in off the street into Reddit and post something or do something, like, the people who are on Reddit all the time can see it coming from a mile away. And they'll let you know. And so, I think that's a great example of like, if you were just to spend time on Reddit or on TikTok or on LinkedIn, like, you start to understand what people are looking for, what stuff resonates, what doesn't, what's the general like tone and approach. And so I think that's probably the biggest, really, is doing that. And then certainly like following the right people in your audience and engaging in that way so that you're actually getting the right context. Because I can't imagine saying, yeah, let's go put a bunch of video clips on TikTok without having any, like, without ever used the app or understand or followed, people and looked at what they're doing and how it's working and all that stuff. So I think that's probably the number one thing to do in almost any channel or any scenario.
Yeah, that's a really good advice that I don't think gets verbalized enough, is really just to spend time on the app, right? Like I same as you, and we kind of read all the threads, we understand the audience, you kind of start seeing themes for what people are talking about, what they're interested in, and you kind of understand the audience for what they're looking for as well. But you never really think to fully go back and analyze, and as you're reading these comments and text for what people are talking about, to remember some of the themes. And that's really good advice that needs to be talked about and shared more often. So yeah, thanks for that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's also like, you can go a level deeper. If, like, take LinkedIn for example, for us, like, in what we do, we can sometimes, the value we're providing on LinkedIn and things we're doing can walk this fine line where like, you could have 2 posts that each get like 100 likes, we'll say. But if you actually go look at who liked it, you could have one that's like, 85, 90% SEOs. And it's because like they actually learned something tactical or whatever from you in that. And then you could look at another one and it's like very heavily weighted to like marketing directors and VPs of marketing and that kind of stuff. So
Mm.
I think even just going level deeper of like, not just like, oh, well, these got 100 likes, so they must be good. But, in your audience and who you're trying to reach, look at some of the content, click in and be like, oh my gosh, like everyone that I would love to have as a customer is liking this type of content.
Yeah.
That's yet
Yeah.
another signal for me, versus just looking at the quantitative metrics on it.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd prefer to have a post with 10 of my ICP liking it than 100 non people that are
Exactly.
bad fit customers, right? Yeah.
Yep.
One of the things that I wanted to kind of chat with you too was really looking at creating a marketing team with creating resources and whatnot. Right now, as we know, with our industry as the way it is, it's a tough time for marketers with resources, with people, with tools, with help, and this whole question of how do you do more with less. And in your experience, creating a team and starting from the startup days of early Sprout and kind of even where you are now, how do you do more with less? How do you wear many hats? And what are some of the tips and maybe some of the experiences that you've gone through that you can share?
It's certainly, I mean, I think we could probably talk for at least 4 hours on the topic overall. One of the things that I think comes to mind initially for me in this discussion is typically thinking about, you have to start from like what you either already know is most important to your strategy, or like channels are the highest revenue producing, whatever it might be. Like start with what you know
Mhm.
is most important and understand how that's being staffed. And so my approach may not work everywhere, may not work for everyone. At Sprout I was the marketing team of one, and I writing a press release, writing a feature page, managing PPC and LinkedIn ads and SEO and doing it all, and just kind of kept trying to do as many things, test as many things as possible, until we very quickly, even within, I think, 6 months, we're like, hey, we're spending, I don't remember what it was, maybe 50 grand a month on paid search. It's taking, easily 50, 60% of my time is being spent here, and we're generating revenue from this channel. This feels like a good opportunity to bring someone in specialized. Like we know there's actually opportunity to grow it from here. It's taking a lot of my time. We bring someone in, they now are spending 100% of their time on it, and I get not all of my time back, because that's not how managing teams works, but I
Yeah.
get most of my time back to then put into more channels. And so we kind of built over time, um, by just focusing on what's the most important things, and how do we continue to build, and how much of my time is it taking. And so I think that's a really critical thing. And then the second part that I would build on top of that is, when you know the most important things, it helps you determine, then you can kind of think through, how do I want to approach this? So if we know that video case studies are a like one of the best things that works for our business, and we're say, hey, this year let's create 8 new ones, I don't know that we need to hire a full-time person for that. It's 8 videos, the equipment is expensive, like there's post-production. It may make more sense to hire a contractor or an agency. And then you look at some of the other channels and the work that needs to be done, and like, is there infinite scale? Is this sort of like specialized skill sets that we need over time? And let you kind of start to think through, do I augment with folks outside of the team, or do I think this is a full-time hire? Because when you go from a marketing team of 1 to 2 or 3, each of those incremental hires is extremely important. And even going from 3 to 10, you're not going to get everything you would love to have. And so I would say those are probably the 2 biggest things, is really knowing what's most important to the overall strategy and to revenue generation. And then, is it something that would warrant full-time in-house hires, or can you augment with contractors or agencies.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think once you find the proper channel and put the resources into it, once you start seeing the success and once you've reached that threshold of where you're like, okay, that's a successful channel that now we want to put resources into, you can start hiring and filling in for that role. I'm curious, in marketing, obviously, there's so many directions to go in the beginning, and building a marketing team is not an easy task because you have 10, 15, 20 different directions you could go. Podcast being one, video could be another. How do you determine which one is most effective for your business at that early stage?
I think there's probably two key things that come to mind for that. One is understanding your product or service and who your ideal audience is, and like generally like what that buying process is going to be like, how they buy, what matters to them, what pains you're solving. And so, obviously for us as an agency, we knew like, hey, this is not going to be like, sure, there may be some people doing it, but like our best ideal clients are not going to just like pop into Google and search, content marketing agency or SEO agency. And like, we're not going to want to try to fight to be number one there, because they're not going to just click, sign up and become like a long-term client. And so we knew that that's much more knowledge sharing and thought leadership and things that are going to go a long way. And so that was a big driver for us in starting the podcast, knowing that that's an area to do that. We can, as we said before, we can pull some of those clips, put on LinkedIn, like we'd already seen. That's a way that people do engage and they respond to that. And so I think that's an example there. So I think you need to understand who does what. But like, again, at Sprout, or some of the other clients that I've worked with, like they are, maybe a bit lower price point than like, an agency service. And it's a bit more transactional, and you can actually compete on the ad side of things and do better there. So I think that's a really big part of it.
It all really ties back to understanding your audience. And even now working at 10 speed, you know who your target audience is and what matters to them. And like you mentioned earlier, kind of, staying on LinkedIn and staying on socials and understanding the mindset of these folks and what they're interested in seeing, and creating that type of content that appeals to them, right? I think you brought up a really good point earlier, is that, what works for one company doesn't work for another, depending on who they are, what their product is. Like we have a podcast and we're talking with thought leaders and we're talking with subject matter experts that speak about these things and teaching folks, but podcast might not work for a different type of company. And same with video might not work for a different type of company. And it really depends on who your audience is.
The core was really understanding your audience. And
yeah.
Yeah.
No, absolutely. Yeah. Very cool, Nate. Hey, thank you so much. We want to keep our episodes short and very valuable and impactful. And I think it's very awesome to hear your experiences coming up as a marketer number one at Sprout, and the success and tenure that you've had today is very cool to see, and continue to follow your journey. Where can our audience find you?
Yeah, you can connect with me on LinkedIn. I think the username is Nate Turner and then the number 1 at the end. So Nate Turner 1. Twitter is at NP Turner. And then you can find 10speed at 10speed.io.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Nate. As always, keep making purposeful content in this B2B world, and we'll catch you next time. Thanks for listening, everybody. Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in. If you like this episode, hit subscribe and rate us wherever you listen to your podcast, or leave a comment if you're watching on YouTube. If video is not already part of your marketing content strategy, it's not too late to start. Create amazing videos with Lumen 5's AI-powered video creator without the need for any design or video editing experience. Check us out at lumen5.com to supercharge your marketing, or follow us on LinkedIn for updates and resources. As always, keep making purposeful content in this B2B world. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.